Hi, everyone. So today we're going to talk about forms of governments, basically how governments organize power. Have you ever wondered why the US government is set up the way it is, or why some countries have one central government making all the decisions, while others give more power to local governments? Well, by the end of this lesson, you'll not only understand these different systems, but you'll also see how they shape everything from laws to local policies. Yes, even the rules you follow at school. Our goal today is to break down two major forms of governance: unitary states and federal states. Each has an advantage and disadvantage, and the type of government and a country chooses affects how laws are made, they're enforced, and how they're changed. Think of it like school. Some schools have one strict principle, unitary, while others let teachers and grade level chairs make decisions, federal. So, which system do you think works better? Let's find out. Okay, so what is a federal state? Now let's flip the script. The federal state shares power between national, state, and local governments. Think of it like school, where each grade level gets to make its own rules for things like hallway passes and lunch schedules, while principal still makes the bigger decisions. Examples of this of federal states would be the U.S., Canada, Germany, and Australia. On the other hand, a unitary state is like a school where the principal makes all the rules and the teachers just carry them out. In a unitary system, the power is held by one central government, and regional governments like states and provinces only exist to enforce what the national government decides. Examples of this would be France, Japan, and the United Kingdom. These governments have one big decision maker making the laws that apply everywhere else in the country. So, the spatial organization of federal governments. The federal states, in the federal states, power is shared between the national and the local governments. Think of it like a layered cake. The national government handles the big picture issues, things like foreign policy and national defense. The state and regional governments handle local laws and policies, things like education or transportation. So the example would be the U.S. The federal government makes nationwide laws, but the states like Florida and Texas have their own rules for things like taxes and school policies. In unitary states, power flows from the top down. So, national government makes the decisions, and the lower level government simply enforces them. Think of it like a pyramid. The national government has all the legislative power, regional and local governments only exist to carry out those orders from above. So, an example would be France. The French government decides the policies in Paris, and the local officials in cities like Nice or Lyon simply enforce them. All right, so some positives with federal government. All right, so there's a reduction of conflict around specific issues because each sub-state can legislate differently. The death penalty or legalization of marijuana, for example, are different where depending where you go. Local issues are resolved more quickly by the regional and local governments. So, for example, in Tennessee, people tend to be more conservative, so they can choose to make marijuana illegal because that suits the people who live there. In Florida, we have an issue with hurricanes, so our procedures are different and more efficient in regards to our hurricane policies. We also have a money allotted for that issue so that every year when hurricane season comes, we already have those plans and that money set in place for accidents that more than likely will happen. All right, so some in unitary governments, the efficiency in creation and implementation of laws is pretty good overall because it comes from one central authority. So change happens very quickly and it only has to go through one central government. So they have a sense of unity when they set something in motion. So they have the centralized power with the national government, and they have faster lawmaking because they don't need to go through multiple levels of government. They just say what's going to happen and that's it. And then they have a national unity because the laws are the same across the country, and it doesn't really avoid any, and it avoids really regional conflicts. So it sounds efficient, but of course there's a downside to this. All right, so the disadvantages of the federal government is that they're slow to enact change. Amending the Constitution from three-fourths of a state needed to be ratified, or it need to be ratified, and then that means that 38 states have to agree. So conflict will between the national, the state, and the local level will often happen, and the governmental units can cause confusion and stall the process of a bill or a law changing because of this. Now, the disadvantages of a unitary government. So, we're going to talk about the cons of this. So, they're slow to respond to local issues. The central government isn't always in touch with local problems. They have a high risk of corruption or authoritarianism. If one group controls the government, they can make the laws that benefit themselves and ignores everybody else. Local governments also have very little power and they can't make any decisions based on what's best for their specific region. So imagine if school's dress code was decided by somebody who had never been to Florida. You might end up with a rule that says coats and scarves are required year round. What's the problem with the centralized government is that they have that power, and a smaller area that doesn't need those changes or need those laws are going to be stuck with it. Okay, so uni means one. Unitary government is the government that by themselves has the power to make decisions for everyone else. They are a one sole governing system and they have power over everyone else and its political subdivisions. So, contrary to that, in contrast to that, the US is designed as a federal system to prevent one government from becoming too powerful. The Constitution divides power between national state governments. That the states can make decisions that fit their local needs. The federal government doesn't have too much power over people's daily lives, and the citizens have multiple levels of government to influence. So these are the positive impacts of a unitary system of government, and of course, the negative impacts of a unitary system of government. And you can go ahead and pause this and write what you need for your notes. But I'm not going to go into each one of these because it's just going to be reading it off, and I don't want to take up that much time. Okay, so the unitary states are the most common form of government in the world. For example, in France and the UK, their power is centralized and the local governments exist, but they don't have much control. Instead, France's policies are decided, so for example, in Paris, and the regional governments just follow orders. In the UK, Parliament in London makes the national laws, and the regions, like Scotland and Wales, have limited autonomy. That means that they're not really able to fully make all the decisions for themselves. Okay, so a federal government system is where the power is shared between national and local governments. Instead of a single national government making all the decisions for everyone else on different levels of the government, like states and cities, they can create their own laws while still being part of the bigger system. In the United States, this is a perfect example of a federal government because power is divided between the federal government and the state governments and the local governments. Each level of government has responsibilities. So Washington, D.C. handles foreign affairs, but Florida gets to decide on its own education policies. Citizens can influence multiple levels of government. You can vote for a city mayor, state governor, and president. So you are able to choose. So think of it like a school district. The school board makes decision-wide rules, but individual schools can decide their own schedules and events. Federalism works the same way. The local government can adapt to their community while still following the national laws. In a unitary state and an authoritarian state, they might sound similar, but they're actually very different. A unitary state has a central government that controls most decisions, but they can still be democratic, like France or Japan. People can vote and have leaders and be removed if people don't like them. Authoritarian states, on the other hand, are where leaders or a small group has total control and the citizens have little to no say in their government. So, for example, like North Korea, Russia, or even Cuba. So, a unitary state like the UK, the government in London makes national laws, but citizens still elect leaders and there are checks and balances in place. Authoritarian states like North Korea, Kim Jong un has complete control and there are no real elections and people have no say in their government at all. So, think of it like school leadership. A unitary system is where the principal makes all the big rules, but the teachers still have some freedom in their classrooms. And then authoritarian school system is where a principal controls everything from the class content to how students walk in the halls, and you can't argue against it. So the bottom line, all authoritarian states are unitary, but not all unitary states are authoritarian. So democracy and elections still make a big difference there. All right, so countries with large land areas or diverse populations often choose federalism. Why? Because having a set of laws for huge, diverse country isn't practical. Some examples are the United States has they're geographically large and diverse. Florida deals with hurricanes while Montana worries about snowstorms. Local governments need to handle their unique issues separately. Another example, Canada has multiple cultural groups. French speaking Quebec has different laws than English speaking provinces. And then in India, different states need different policies to reflect their cultural, religious, and economic differences. Now, why some countries would choose a unitary state? Smaller, more homogeneous countries often choose a unitary state because it's easier to govern a smaller country from a central authority. It ensures that national unity, everyone follows the same laws, and there's less conflict between the local and national governments. So the example would be Japan. One national government controls the laws for the entire country. Okay, so to summarize, unitary states have a centralized power, faster lawmaking, and more national unity. Federal states allow for local control, but this can create legal conflicts. And then countries choose systems based on their size, diversity, and their history. So imagine you're creating a brand new country. Would you choose a unitary or a federal system? All right, so that is it for today. Governments shape everything from taxes to education. And next time you hear about a law, think about who made it and why. And I will see you guys next class. Remember to complete your reflections and remember to finish your lesson reviews. And don't forget to write down any questions that you might have so that we can discuss them when we meet back in class. See you guys then.